Drummerly.com Unlimited Drama Series.
What would you do if your own daughter handed you a suitcase for Christmas and told you your taxi to a nursing home was waiting? When I opened the front door, expecting a driver, I saw my son instead, and my daughter bolted from the house screaming. How did a calm, forgotten father turn the tables on the ones who tried to erase him, using only the law, evidence, and iron resolve? My name is Warren Hensley, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd earned the right to live peacefully in the house I'd spent 30 years paying off. The two-story colonial on Maple Street had been home to my late wife Margaret and me since 1987, and after her passing 3 years ago, it became my sanctuary, or so I believed. The morning started like any other Tuesday in November. I was in my kitchen, methodically preparing my coffee and toast, when I heard the familiar slam of a car door in my driveway. Through the window, I watched my daughter, Kendra Hensley Brooks, march up the walkway, her designer heels clicking against the concrete with the precision of a metronome. At 33, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, a mistake Margaret and I had made during her upbringing. "Dad, we need to talk," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries as she pushed through the front door. Her husband, Frank Brooks, followed behind her, his mortgage broker's smile plastered across his face like a campaign poster. "Good morning to you too, Kendra," I replied, settling into my favorite armchair in the living room. The chair had been Margaret's gift to me on our 20th anniversary, and its worn leather arms had molded perfectly to my frame over the years. Kendra didn't sit. Instead, she stood in the center of my living room, hands on her hips, surveying the space like a real estate agent evaluating property. Which, I supposed, wasn't far from the truth. "This place is falling apart, Dad. Look at this furniture. It's ancient." "It's comfortable," I said quietly. "Comfortable?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, you're living in the past. This whole house smells like old man and mothballs." Frank chuckled from his position near the mantelpiece, where he was examining family photos with the casual interest of someone appraising antiques. "Kendra's right, Warren. Maybe it's time to think about downsizing." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the familiar warmth ground me. I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my own home. "Are you?" Kendra moved to the window, pulling back the curtains I'd drawn for privacy. "When's the last time you cleaned these? Or updated anything in here? Dad, you're moving like you're 90 years old." The criticism stung, but I'd learned over the past few years that defending myself only encouraged her. Margaret used to handle Kendra's moods with a gentle but firm hand. Without her buffer, I found myself constantly walking on eggshells around my own daughter. "I manage just fine," I said. "Managing isn't living." Kendra turned from the window, her expression shifting to what I'd come to recognize as her intervention face. "Frank and I have been talking. There are some really nice senior communities in town. Places where you could have your own apartment, but also have help when you need it." "I don't need help." "Dad, you're being stubborn." She moved to my bookshelf, randomly pulling out volumes and flipping through them before putting them back in the wrong places. "You can't even reach the top shelves anymore. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" Frank nodded sagely. "It's about safety, Warren, and practicality." I watched my daughter rearrange my living room without permission, moving my reading lamp to a spot where the light would be useless, shifting the coffee table so it blocked my usual path to the kitchen. She did these things unconsciously, I realized, asserting control over my space, as if it were already hers. "Kendra, please don't move my things." "See, you're getting agitated over nothing." She exchanged a meaningful look with Frank. "This is exactly what we're talking about. You're becoming rigid, Dad. Set in your ways." The conversation continued for another hour, with Kendra painting increasingly dire pictures of my future if I remained isolated in my own home. She had statistics about elderly falls, stories about neighbors who'd found elderly relatives after incidents, and a folder of glossy brochures for retirement communities. "Just think about it," she said as they prepared to leave. "I'm only looking out for you." After they left, I sat in my rearranged living room, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I moved the lamp back to its proper place repositioned the coffee table, and tried to restore order. But something had shifted, and I couldn't quite put it back the way it was. That evening, I was washing dishes when I heard Kendra's voice through the kitchen window. She was on her phone, standing by her car in my driveway, apparently having returned to retrieve something she'd forgotten. "No, Mom, he's being impossible," she was saying. I realized she was talking to her mother-in-law. "He's completely unreasonable about the whole thing. I'm trying to help him, but he acts like I'm the enemy." I moved closer to the window, staying in the shadows. "The house is worth at least $400,000 in this market," she continued. "Maybe more if we did some updates. But he's just sitting on it like a dragon hoarding gold." My blood went cold. She wasn't talking about my safety or well-being. She was talking about my house as an asset. "Frank thinks we should wait it out, but I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending to be patient. Every month he stays there is money down the drain." She ended the call and drove away, leaving me standing in my kitchen with the devastating realization that my daughter saw me not as her father, but as an obstacle to her inheritance. The next morning, I found a calendar on my refrigerator that hadn't been there before. It was open to January, and someone had written in red ink on January 2nd, "Dad's move-in day." Kendra had left me a schedule for my own eviction. The phone rang at 7:30 that evening, and I knew before answering that it would be my son Elliot calling from Berlin. He maintained a religious schedule of weekly calls, adjusting for the 6-hour time difference, so we could talk during my dinner and his late evening. "Hey, Dad," his voice came through clear despite the distance. "How was your week?" I settled into my chair, looking out at the November darkness. "Oh, the usual." "Kendra visit recently?" Elliot had always been perceptive, even as a child. At 36, he'd built a successful career as a software architect for a German tech company, but he still possessed the intuitive understanding of family dynamics that had made him my peacekeeper when he was younger. "She came by Tuesday," I said carefully. "And?" I found myself telling him about the retirement community brochures, the rearranged furniture, the calendar on my refrigerator. I didn't mention the conversation I'd overheard. Somehow, speaking that betrayal aloud felt too raw. "Dad, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, right?" Elliot's voice carried an edge I recognized from his teenage years, when he'd appointed himself Kendra's conscience. "That's your house, your decision. She thinks she's helping. Does she?" There was a long pause. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Last time I was home, remember, for Mom's birthday last year? Kendra said some things that bothered me." I remembered that visit. Elliot had flown in for what would have been Margaret's 65th birthday, a gesture that had meant the world to me. Kendra had been notably absent, claiming a work conflict. "What kind of things?" "She kept asking about your finances. Whether you had a will, who had power of attorney, what would happen to the house." At the time, I thought she was just being practical, but the way she asked, he trailed off. It felt calculating. We talked for another hour, and Elliot shared stories from his life in Berlin, his work on a new project, his girlfriend, Astrid, the small apartment they shared near the Spree River. He painted pictures of Christmas markets and cobblestone streets, of a life he'd built 3,000 miles away from the family drama he'd grown up mediating. "I wish I could visit more often," he said before we hung up. "But the flights are expensive, and work is crazy right now." "I understand," I told him, and I did. Elliot had escaped to build something better, and I wouldn't guilt him into returning to clean up the mess Kendra was making. But after we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and remembered how different things had been when they were children. Margaret and I had married young and started our family immediately. Elliot came first, a serious baby who grew into a thoughtful child. Kendra followed 3 years later. Demanding attention from the moment she drew breath. Where Elliot was content with books and building blocks, Kendra wanted audiences and applause. When Margaret was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at 58, our family dynamics shifted dramatically. I took early retirement from my engineering job to care for her, burning through our savings to afford the treatments and modifications our house needed. Elliot, then in college, worked part-time jobs to pay his own expenses rather than burden us further. Kendra, finishing high school, seemed to view her mother's illness as a personal inconvenience. "Why can't we just put her somewhere?" she'd asked during one particularly difficult evening when Margaret had wandered outside in her nightgown, confused and frightened. "Because she's your mother," I'd replied, "and this is her home." Kendra never forgave me for that answer. The next morning, I drove to my usual coffee shop downtown, Henderson's Cafe, a local institution that had somehow survived the invasion of chain stores. I'd been coming here since my retirement, enjoying the ritual of reading the paper over a proper cup of coffee and watching the town wake up. "Morning, Warren," called Paula Chenoweth from a corner table. At 64, Paula was a retired nurse who lived 3 houses down from me. She'd been Margaret's friend first, but had become my ally in the years since Margaret's death. "Morning, Paula." I joined her at her table, grateful for the company. "You look troubled," she observed with the directness that had made her an excellent nurse. "Everything all right?" I found myself telling her about Kendra's recent visits, the pressure to move, the calendar on my refrigerator. Paula listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. "Warren," she said when I finished, "I need to tell you something. Last week I was at the grocery store and I overheard Kendra talking to that friend of hers, the blonde one with the loud laugh. Bethany Morrison, that's the one." Kendra was going on about how she was almost ready to solve the dad problem and how she'd have him out of that house by Christmas. Paula's expression was troubled. "She was laughing about it, Warren? Like it was some kind of joke." The words hit me like a physical blow. The dad problem. That's what I'd become to my own daughter, a problem to be solved. "There's more," Paula continued gently. "She mentioned something about paperwork and signatures. Said she just needed to get you to sign a few things, and then it would all be taken care of." I spent the rest of the morning driving aimlessly through town, trying to process what I'd learned. Kendra wasn't just pressuring me to move. She was actively planning my removal from my own home. The calendar wasn't a suggestion. It was a deadline. When I returned home, I went straight to my basement workshop. The space had been my retreat during Margaret's illness, a place where I could work with my hands and find some peace amid the chaos. Now, I sat among my tools and tried to think like the engineer I'd once been. Problems had solutions. Kendra was a problem. Therefore, Kendra had a solution. I just needed to find it. The first thing I did was examine my finances. I'd always been meticulous about record keeping, a habit that had served me well during my engineering career and had become even more important after Margaret's illness. Every bank statement, every receipt, every financial document was filed chronologically in my home office. What I found made my hands shake. Over the past 6 months, there had been a series of withdrawals from my savings account. Small amounts at first, $50 or $100, but escalating to larger sums. The most recent withdrawal, dated just 2 weeks ago, was for $15,000. I called the bank immediately. "Mr. Hensley," the customer service representative said after I'd explained my concern, "those withdrawals were all made with your debit card and PIN. Do you suspect fraud?" "I suspect something," I said carefully. "Can you tell me where the withdrawals were made?" The largest withdrawal, the $15,000, had been made at a branch across town in the form of a cashier's check made out to Riverside Auto Sales. I hung up and sat in my office, staring at the bank statement. Kendra had somehow gained access to my account and had used my money to buy herself a car. The drive to Riverside Auto Sales took 20 minutes through increasingly congested traffic. The lot was crowded with late-model used cars, their windshields decorated with bright yellow price stickers. I found the sales office and asked to speak with the manager. "Mr. Hensley?" The manager, an energetic man in his 40s named Pete Kowalski, greeted me with enthusiasm. "Great to see you again. How's Kendra enjoying the Lexus?" My heart sank. "The Lexus? Beautiful car. 2019 RX 35. Oh, low mileage, pristine condition." She said it was an early Christmas gift from her father. Pete beamed at me. You've got a lucky daughter there. Can you show me the paperwork? Pete's smile faltered slightly. Is there a problem? I just want to review the details. The paperwork told the story I'd dreaded. Kendra had purchased a luxury SUV for $18,000, paying $15,000 in cash and financing the remainder. She'd registered the vehicle in her name and listed me as a reference, claiming the cash was a gift from her father. She mentioned you might stop by, Pete said, reading my expression. Said you sometimes get confused about financial matters. Something about your age? The humiliation burned in my chest. Kendra had not only stolen from me, she'd preemptively painted me as a senile old man to cover her tracks. Thank you for your time, I managed. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd discovered. Kendra hadn't just taken my money. She'd done it systematically, carefully, with a plan to discredit me if I discovered her theft. That evening, I called my old friend, Carl Jefferson. Carl and I had known each other for 25 years, ever since he'd handled the legal work for my house.
I was drunk. I didn't know what I was doing.
Drunk? I have everything on video.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
Purchase. He'd since built a successful practice specializing in estate planning and elder law. Warren, good to hear from you, Carl said when his secretary put me through. What can I do for you? I explained the situation, the pressure to move, the stolen money, the car purchase. Carl listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or specific details. Warren, I need to ask you some hard questions, he said when I finished. Do you have a will? Yes, drawn up after Margaret died. Everything goes to the kids equally. Power of attorney? No one has power of attorney. Good. That's good. I could hear Carl making notes. Has Kendra ever asked you to sign any documents? Anything at all? I thought back over recent months. She's brought me some papers a few times. Said they were for insurance or medical purposes. I signed them without reading them carefully. We need to meet, Carl said. Tomorrow, if possible. And Warren? Don't sign anything else. Nothing. Not even a birthday card. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house, looking at it with new eyes. The family photos on the mantelpiece, the furniture Margaret and I had chosen together, the garden she'd planted and I'd maintained, all of it was under threat. But more than that, I was under threat. Kendra wasn't just after my house or my money. She was systematically undermining my autonomy, my dignity, my right to make decisions about my own life. I went to my workshop and pulled out a legal pad. At the top of the page, I wrote, evidence. Then I began making a list of everything I knew, everything I could prove, and everything I needed to find out. By morning, I had a plan. Carl's law office occupied the second floor of a restored Victorian house downtown, its walls lined with legal volumes and family photos that spoke of a man who understood the importance of both precedent and legacy. I arrived early for our 10 o'clock appointment, carrying a folder containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Warren, you look tired, Carl observed as he poured coffee from a silver service that had belonged to his grandfather. I've been doing research. I spread the bank statements across his mahogany desk, followed by the car purchase documentation, the retirement home brochures Kendra had left behind, and photographs I'd taken of the calendar she'd placed on my refrigerator. Carl studied the materials with the methodical attention that had made him one of the most respected attorneys in town. His expression grew increasingly grave as he worked through the evidence. This is financial exploitation, he said finally. Textbook elder abuse. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want to protect myself, and I want to make sure this never happens again. Carl leaned back in his chair. Let's start with immediate protections. We'll change your banking arrangements, set up new accounts with different access protocols. I'll also draft a revocation of any powers of attorney you might have inadvertently signed. What about the money she took? We can pursue recovery, but that might mean criminal charges. Are you prepared for that level of confrontation with your daughter? I thought about Kendra's laugh as she discussed solving the dad problem, about her casual dismissal of my autonomy, about the calendar marking my eviction date. What are my other options? We make it clear that you're not the vulnerable target she thinks you are. We document everything, create legal barriers to future exploitation, and ensure she understands the consequences of her actions. Carl pulled out a fresh legal pad. Tell me about your son. Elliot lives in Berlin. He's a software architect, successful, responsible. He calls every week, but he can't visit often because of the distance and expense. How's your relationship with him? Strong. He's always been the peacemaker in the family, but he's also fiercely protective when he needs to be. Carl made notes. I'm thinking we should bring Elliot into this. If you're comfortable with it, we could establish a power of attorney arrangement with him. It would prevent Kendra from claiming you're incompetent or isolated. The idea appealed to me. Elliot had always been trustworthy, and his distance from the immediate situation might actually be an advantage. There's something else, Carl continued. Your house. Is it in your name alone? Yes, paid off completely. We should consider adding Elliot as a co-owner. It would make it much harder for anyone to pressure you into selling or transferring ownership. I spent 2 hours in Carl's office, signing documents and making plans. He arranged for Elliot to receive power of attorney documents via overnight courier, along with a detailed letter explaining the situation. We also set up a new bank account that only Elliot and I could access, and arranged for my existing accounts to require dual authorization for any withdrawals over $500. One more thing, Carl said as I prepared to leave. I want you to start documenting every interaction with Kendra. Dates, times, what was said, who else was present. If this escalates, we'll need a detailed record. That afternoon, I drove to Riverside Auto Sales with a different purpose. Pete Kowalski seemed surprised to see me again so soon. Mr. Hensley, what can I do for you? I want to buy back the Lexus. Pete's confusion was evident. Sir, your daughter just bought that car 2 weeks ago. The car was purchased with stolen money, I said calmly. I have documentation proving the funds were taken from my account without authorization. I showed him the bank statements and the police report I'd filed that morning. Pete's demeanor shifted from friendly salesman to cautious businessman. I'll need to speak with my manager, he said. It took 3 hours and several phone calls to Carl's office. But eventually, Riverside Auto Sales agreed to repurchase the vehicle. They couldn't give me the full amount. The car had depreciated the moment it left the lot, but I recovered $13,000 of the $15,000 Kendra had stolen. The satisfaction was worth more than the $2,000 loss. That evening, Kendra called. Dad, I just got the strangest call from Pete at the car lot. He said you came in claiming I stole money from you. Her voice carried the perfect blend of hurt and confusion that she'd mastered as a teenager. If I hadn't seen the bank statements myself, I might have been convinced I'd made a mistake. The money came from my account without my permission, I said. Dad, you're being paranoid. I told you about the car. You said it was fine. I never said any such thing. You did. Last month, when Frank and I were over, we were talking about my old car breaking down, and you offered to help. Her voice rose slightly, the way it did when she was constructing a lie in real time. You said you wanted to help me get something reliable. Kendra, I have the bank records. $15,000 was withdrawn using my debit card and PIN. How did you get my PIN? There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Colder, more calculated. Dad, you're clearly having some memory issues. This is exactly why Frank and I are concerned about you living alone. You're getting confused, making accusations that don't make sense. I'm not confused. You gave me your card and PIN 3 months ago when I went to the pharmacy to pick up your prescriptions. Remember? You said it would be easier than writing checks all the time. It was possible. I had asked her to pick up medications for me on occasion, but I would never have given her blanket access to my accounts. Even if that's true, I said, I didn't authorize you to buy a car. Dad, we talked about this. You're not remembering clearly. Her voice softened, taking on the patronizing tone she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. This is exactly what I've been worried about. These memory lapses, the confusion about conversations we've had. Maybe it's time to consider getting some help. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen, shaken by her performance. If I hadn't documented everything, if I hadn't spoken to Carl, I might have started doubting my own memory. Kendra was more dangerous than I'd realized, not just greedy, but skilled at manipulation and gaslighting. I called Elliot. Dad, I got the documents from your lawyer, he said before I could speak. I'm booking a flight. Elliot, you don't need to. Dad, yes, I do. I should have come home sooner. I should have seen what was happening. When can you get here? I'm looking at flights now. Christmas is in 3 weeks. I can probably get there a few days before, maybe the 22nd or 23rd. Kendra doesn't know you're coming. No, and let's keep it that way. I think the element of surprise might be useful. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. I wasn't alone in this fight, and Kendra had no idea what was coming. The next 2 weeks passed in an uneasy calm. Kendra continued her visits, but they took on a different character now that I was paying attention. She would arrive unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key I'd forgotten she had, and conduct what she called wellness checks. Just making sure you're taking care of yourself, Dad, she'd say, while systematically going through my mail, checking my refrigerator, and asking pointed questions about my daily routines. During one visit, she discovered that her access to my bank accounts had been restricted. Dad, I tried to pick up your prescriptions, but your card was declined, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I changed banks, I replied. Better interest rates. Oh, she paused, and I could see her mind working. Well, you should give me the new card information. For emergencies. I'll handle my own prescriptions from now on. Her smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. Dad, that's not practical. What if you forget? What if you have another one of those confused episodes? I haven't had any confused episodes. The car situation suggests otherwise. I realized she was testing me, probing to see how much I remembered, how much I suspected. The conversation felt like a chess match, where I was only beginning to understand the rules. I remember the car situation perfectly, I said. Do you? She studied my face for a long moment, then laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Oh, Dad, I hope you're not going to make this difficult for everyone. That night, I found her in my home office, going through my filing cabinet. Kendra, what are you doing? Looking for your insurance papers, she said without turning around. I want to make sure you have adequate coverage for when you move. I'm not moving. Dad, we've been through this. You can't stay here indefinitely. She pulled out a folder and began flipping through it. You're going to need long-term care insurance, Medicare supplements, all sorts of things. It's complicated. I can handle my own insurance. Can you? She turned to face me, holding a document I didn't recognize. Because according to this cognitive assessment form, you've been experiencing significant memory loss and confusion. My blood went cold. What cognitive assessment? The one Dr. Phillips administered last month? Don't you remember going to see him? I did remember the appointment. Kendra had insisted on driving me to what she said was a routine checkup. Dr. Phillips had asked me a series of questions that seemed oddly focused on my memory and decision-making abilities. Dr. Phillips said I was fine. Dad, that's not what this says. She held up the document but didn't let me see it clearly. He's recommended a full neurological evaluation. He's concerned about early-stage dementia. Let me see that. Dad, don't get upset. This is why I'm here, to help you navigate these kinds of medical issues. I reached for the document, but she pulled it back. Kendra, give me that paper. Dad, you're getting agitated. This is exactly the kind of behavior Dr. Phillips was concerned about. The next morning, I called Dr. Phillips' office directly. Mr. Hensley, the nurse said, Dr. Phillips would be happy to discuss your test results with you. Can you come in this afternoon? What test results? From your cognitive assessment last month. I made the appointment and spent the morning in a state of growing dread. Had I somehow agreed to testing without realizing it? Was my memory actually failing? Dr. Phillips, a man I'd trusted for 15 years, greeted me with unusual formality. Warren, I'm glad you came in. I've been concerned about some of the symptoms your daughter described. What symptoms? The memory lapses, the confusion about recent events, the difficulty managing finances. He consulted a file on his desk. Kendra was quite detailed in her observations. Dr. Phillips, I haven't experienced any memory lapses. Warren, that's often how these conditions present. The patient isn't aware of the deficits. He leaned forward, his expression kind but patronizing. Kendra showed me some examples. Bills you'd forgotten to pay, appointments you'd missed, conversations you couldn't remember having. None of that is true. Warren, Denial is a common response, but we caught this early, which is good news. There are treatments that can slow the progression. I realized what had happened. Kendra had orchestrated this entire scenario, feeding Dr. Phillips false information about my mental state and somehow getting him to conduct an assessment based on her lies. I want a copy of my complete medical file, I said. Of course, but Warren, I think what's more important is that we discuss care options. Kendra mentioned you've been resistant to the idea of assisted living, but given these test results, what test results? I never took any tests. Dr. Phillips looked confused. Warren, you were here last month. We spent an hour going through cognitive assessments. You asked me questions. I answered them correctly. Some of them, yes. But there were significant deficits in short-term memory and executive function. I asked to see the assessment. What I found was a document that bore little resemblance to my actual visit. According to Dr. Phillips' notes, I had been confused about the date, unable to remember recent events, and had given inconsistent answers to basic questions about my living situation. Dr. Phillips, this isn't what happened. Warren, I understand this is difficult to accept. No, you don't understand. My daughter has been lying to you. I spent an hour explaining the real situation, the financial theft, the pressure to move, the systematic campaign to undermine my independence. Dr. Phillips listened with growing concern, but I could see he wasn't sure whether to believe me or view my explanations as further evidence of cognitive decline. Warren, these are serious accusations. They're not accusations, they're facts. I have documentation. In